Hello, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you for a Reason to Resist from Kalamata, Greece on June 22nd, 2026. While much of the world's attention has been fixed and with complete justification on the momentous events in West Asia, yesterday Colombia held a hotly contested presidential election runoff between Abelardo de la Espriella, a far-right millionaire who was aggressively promoted by Donald Trump, and progressive lawmaker Ivan Cepeda. For the moment, de la Espriella holds a razor-thin lead of 49.75% of the votes versus 48.7% for his progressive opponent, with 99.9% of results released by electoral authorities. And here you can see a report from NBC News today saying that his victory, de la Espriella's victory, were it to be validated, is expected to usher in policies that will reverse the agenda of outgoing President Gustavo Petro, including a controversial plan to hold parallel peace negotiations with illegal armed groups. Well, that's controversial from the perspective of those who like war, I suppose. In any case, the stakes are very high, and it bears mentioning that de la Espriella holds dual Colombian and U.S. citizenship. Reportedly, he is a Trump supporter, unsurprisingly, after all, the Donald aggressively promoted him. And he's even a member of the Republican Party. He won big, Trump said on his social media platform after the results or preliminary results were announced. Colombian election officials have not yet formally announced the winner. Cepeda and the current president of Colombia, Gustavo Petro, have raised serious questions about the accuracy of the official vote count. Cepeda has signaled his intention to challenge the validity of the result if Colombian electoral authorities declare de la Espriella to be the winner. He said, quote, "We will not allow the rollback of the social gains we have achieved. We will not allow democracy to be violated." Now here to discuss all of this with us is Ajamu Baraka. Ajamu is a human rights defender whose experience spans 5 decades. He corrected me before we began today. I was going to say 4, of domestic and international education and activism. His roots are in the Black Liberation Movement. He was the 2016 vice presidential candidate of the Green Party of the United States and is a contributing editor of the Black Agenda Report and a director of the Black Alliance for Peace North-South Project for People-Centered Human Rights. It's a great pleasure to have you back on our program, Ajamu. Thank you for joining us.
Comrade, I'm really happy to be here. And if you saying 4 decades would take me back a little bit in time, I would definitely take that. So thanks a lot.
Well, if it's any comfort to you, my work spans 4 decades, although not 5. So yet, in any case, before we begin, Ajamu, I just want to remind our audience, if they find this video to be informative, please like and share it. And if you're not already a subscriber to Reason to Resist, please become one and help us to expand the reach of our unapologetic resistance journalism. So, Ajamu, could you please start by telling us about the background of this far-right upstart? I just mentioned a couple of big picture facts. What can you tell us about the history of Abelardo de la Espriella, who I understand has never run for political office before?
Well, let me answer that by first sort of doing this, if you don't mind, comrade. That basically, as I sit here in Cali, Colombia, I think it's important for us to contextualize what, in fact, is unfolding here politically in this country. And to understand that, we have to look at the regional realities and indeed the global realities. This effort here in Colombia and the support that the right-wing candidate received from Donald Trump is in alignment with the expressed plans on the part of the U.S. to, in essence, recolonize the Americas. It is part of a strategy fully reflected in their national security strategy for them to consolidate themselves in the Western Hemisphere. And that means that they are utilizing the tool that they have utilized in their desperate attempts to try to maintain global hegemony, which is militarism and force, the use of illegal sanctions, destabilization, and direct military interventions using kinetic attacks. Here in this region, we know that we have a situation where the U.S. went in and kidnapped a sitting president in Venezuela. Venezuela being key to the progressive politics, if you will, to support the state that can provide material support for progressive politics, radical politics in this region. Thus, of course, undermining that process, the Bolivarian process there in Venezuela. They then, of course, imposed in essence, a siege on Cuba, utilizing some of the same kinds of tactics and tools that was imposed and perfected in Gaza. And we see the consequence. We see that politics are shifting to the right here in this region. They have been very active in supporting right-wing um, uh, political figures in Bolivia and Peru, where there's a contested election. There is another U.S. citizen who is the head of state in Ecuador, and Daniel Noboa, and now we have Colombia. Colombia is important in terms of the possibility of providing some degree of a break, or at least a process of slowing down the momentum from the U.S. Right now, the U.S. has in its crosshairs, of course, Colombia, Mexico, and even Brazil, even though it's quite clear that Lula and the Brazilian state is almost in lockstep with some of the neoliberal policies unfolding in the region and globally. And so this is why the election in Colombia was so critically important. This was the first election that had the possibility, and still might have the possibility, of having some degree of continuity in progressive slash even radical politics here in this country. Coming out of the 4 years of Gustavo Petro's administration, we have Ivan Cepeda, who coming out of the same political motion, the historical pact, attempting to try to provide some degree of continuity to some of the progressive policies put in place under Petro. Of course, the political right, who was opposed to Petro, they mobilized in opposition, and they found this candidate, this American citizen, who gives great speeches, who's bringing in all of the kind of right-wing machoism that we see in the U.S. among political characters, who promised that instead of a negotiation with armed groups, he would reintroduce the very vicious Colombian national security state. And part of helping to make that argument, Demetrius, was that there was an uptick in violence in the country leading into the election. They helped to create the narrative that the so-called left is unable to provide security and safety, and that what in fact was needed was to take off the velvet glove and smash the left. In fact, he said that the left will be disemboweled if he, in fact, he's able to assume power in Colombia. So this is the sort of the context, if you will, for the politics. His particular biography is interesting in the sense that, of course, he comes out of the right. He is an attorney that made a name for representing some notorious figures inside the country, drug dealers and others. He has money. He's a business person. But more importantly, he spent significant time in the U.S., and that became an issue in the campaign. And he saw an opportunity. They were. I think the right was very clear that they didn't have very strong candidates, and it looked like Ivan Cepeda might, in fact, have a clear path to the presidency. But they coalesced around this candidate, and we that's where we are at this particular moment, waiting for the official announcement to take place in another day or two.
So I want to just come back to the validity of the results in a moment. Could you just highlight for us, Ajamu, what were, in your opinion, the most important aspects of his opponent's platform, Cepeda? He's been described variously as a leftist, as a progressive. What do you think really stood out for you in his platform?
Well, the fact that he wants to continue the progressive direction of the previous government. They want to attempt to try to bring some degree of stability by engaging in this negotiation, if you will, with armed groups. Armed groups meaning both the traditional kinds of left guerrilla elements, but also some of the groups that can be defined as sort of paramilitary narco outfits. This was an initiative introduced by Gustavo Petro, and there was some degree of progress, even though there was a breakdown and there was, in fact, an escalation of violence in some parts of the country. You have dissident FARC groups. Your listeners may remember that FARC was the guerrilla organization that contested the Colombian state for decades until there was a peace process and a signing of a peace accord almost now 10 years ago. But some of those elements went back to the bush because they didn't believe that sufficient progress was being made and that the government was not living up to its obligations. You have also the continuation of the ELN that it continues to battle the Colombian government, another guerrilla group, if you will, that is engaged in its own process of discussions, negotiations with the Colombian government also. So, the new would-be president wants to reverse that. Other social progressive legislation that was passed was an increase in the minimum wage, the first one in quite some time, a significant one, as a matter of fact, of over 30%. And some, typical kinds of social redistribution policies that made it easier for some people to go to college, some degree of support for job training, et cetera, et cetera. It's important to note that in this country, almost more than 60% of the labor force is in the so-called informal sector. And so helping people to have the ability to be able to secure more permanent employment was a very important policy also. So these are just some of the progressive policies that they were trying to institute to provide more protections for the Afro-Colombian and indigenous populations, to continue and to speed up the process of granting land titles to Afro-Colombians and indigenous people that the Petro government put in place and accelerated, and Ivan Cepeda wanted to continue.
Would you characterize the socioeconomic agenda of Gustavo Petro and Cepeda as radically left-wing, or would you view them more as being in the nature of social democratic reforms, modestly left-wing reforms?
I have to put it in the category of social democratic reforms. While there is a base for more radical politics in the country, the nature of the Colombian state and the positionality of left forces are such that there was a decision that was made that basically, with this experiment with occupying a governmental power and being in a contest with the Congress, that they should try to manage expectations and push through some reforms that could make a difference, but would create a certain kind of political momentum that can help to push further more radical structural changes in the Colombian state and in the Colombian economy. You have
Mhm.
to you have to remember that having governmental power does not really mean you have state power. And we are talking about a state here in Colombia that's fairly entrenched. It is a colonial capitalist state and a state that is in lockstep uh, symbiotic relationships with the one of the most vicious bourgeoisies on the American continent. And so that that foundation was being laid, and the hope was that that could be built off of in a administration headed up by Ivan Cepeda.
So let's talk now about the validity or lack thereof of the election results. I want to share with you and our audience a post today by Gustavo Petro on X. President Petro said, I will pass to the judges with precision the change servers. I think he's talking here about the servers on which the votes were tabulated or recorded, so that they conduct the expert audit of the electoral software that has not been carried out to do it in the very process of scrutiny. I request a scrutiny of all polling stations and a new count of all votes with a study of vulnerabilities in the electoral software and the stations that suffered impacts to the entire population. I request calm and restraint to achieve a thorough and well done scrutiny that reflects the true decision of the citizenry. I maintain that it is time, before letting hatred win, to seek a national dialogue among the fundamental political currents that divide Colombian society in half, whatever the real outcome of the scrutiny may be. And he continued by saying, I warned that the software of the Bautista brothers was vulnerable according to the 2018 Council of State ruling, and that it should be replaced with public software. He then goes on to say, today we have evidence of a change in IP addresses of several services of the National Registry. This means that the software was compromised and others wrote data for polling stations and voting posts. The only entity in the world capable of doing that is the state of Israel, he wrote. And today also, independent journalist Max Blumenthal commented on the Bautista brothers. He said they are convicted fraudsters who own the private offshore company that manages Colombia's voting software. Their company botched Colombian elections in 2014, 2022, when 400,000 votes for Petro's party went missing. Ajamu, what do you make of these allegations?
I think that they are serious ones, especially when you put it into context. Again, the what the politics are that are unfolding here in the region and the various relationships. I think your listeners are aware of what is referred to as Honduras Gate, when it was revealed that there was this relationship between the Trump administration and Israel to spring the convicted president of Honduras, who was serving time in the U.S. as a convicted drug dealer, to have him play a role not only in Honduras once he was given a pardon by Donald Trump, but to help to consolidate right-wing forces across the region. And so this relationship between the two leading fascist states on the planet, the U.S. And Israel, and the stated objective of the U.S. to recolonize the region, provides I think, a foundation, a credible foundation for at least looking into these allegations that Israel would play the role that the president has indicated. So these are serious allegations that should be investigated. It's unfortunate that it's going to call into serious question of the election. We know that the Secretary of State of the U.S. is aware of these allegations and the concerns, and that the Rubio understands that the election is not official until there's the official declaration from the Colombian registry. But yet, Rubio is already congratulating the new president, and what that says to us is that they're setting up a reaction just in case things don't work out the way they have been planned. So, yes, this has to be investigated. It is not beyond the pale of how these right-wing forces operate. And it's unfortunate that this is the new reality, but I mean, the new reality that's been imposed on the people of this continent is something that people are finally coming to terms with. The fact that the U.S. has, in essence, declared war on the people in this region, and that the only way that that war can be resisted is through uncompromised opposition.
So in March of this year, Ajamu, Ecuador's armed forces, backed by the United States, conducted airstrikes on camps on that they claim belong to narco-terrorist groups along the country's northern border with Colombia. And in January of this year, Ecuadorian President Daniel Noboa announced plans for a 30% tariff on goods imported from Colombia, leading his counterpart, President Petro of Colombia, to announce a halt on electricity sales to Ecuador. Do you think it's fair to say that the Ecuadorian government of Noboa has partnered with the United States in an attempt to discredit and destabilize the leftist government of Colombia?
Not only were they attempting to undermine the government in Colombia, but they are clear. They are in clear alignment with the U.S. and the objectives of the U.S. In the region. They are part of this shield of the Americas to consolidate the right-wing forces in this region, and the special operation deployment, if you will, between the U.S. and Ecuador is just the beginning of that process. We have to remember that this goes back to the context. I didn't go into all these details, but this is part of the context of the recolonization that's taking place here in this region. That you have something like 72 bases, U.S. bases, depending on how one defines a base, throughout the South America and the Caribbean. You have the U.S. has access agreements and joint operation agreements with various countries. You have the U.S. Through Southcom training various militaries. You have these special operations deployments, like what you just described. It took place in Ecuador. In Ecuador, Daniel Noboa is opening up the possibility of the U.S. reoccupying a military base that was closed some years ago, and which they also had a referendum asking the question to the Ecuadorian people if they would support the reopening of that base in Mantas. And overwhelming majority of the people said that they were opposed to that. So now they are having some little scheme where they are theoretically circulating U.S. forces in and out so there's not a full occupation, if you will. But this is all part of the plan. They are attempting, the U.S. is attempting to militarize the entire Pacific coast. Its eyes is on control of the continent, but specifically the Pacific coast. Of course, we know that their eye is also on the lithium triangle. That's why they have been deeply involved in the politics of Bolivia. We know what they did in places like Argentina, and so this is part of the aggressive attempt on the part of the U.S. administration, working through its U.S. cutouts, if you will, to reimpose U.S. Continental hegemony. And look, let me comment real quickly about Ecuador again in terms of how the Trump administration used this bogus notion of drugs and the drug cartels to justify stationing military forces off the coast of Venezuela and engaging in these extrajudicial executions on both the Atlantic coast and the Pacific coast. Everybody knows that the main conduit for drugs now, cocaine coming out of South America, is through what country? Ecuador. The Noboa family are the ones that are the main owners of the banana plantations. They ship literally tons of bananas from Ecuador to across Europe. And everybody knows that those containers are filled up with more than just bananas. That they have become now the new transshipment of cocaine, and that powerful forces there in Ecuador are in alignment with powerful gangster forces uh, um, in Albania, and they are flooding Europe, and even in making their way back to the U.S. and other parts of the world with cocaine. But there's no focus on stemming that obvious flow by the U.S. Why? They're not really concerned about those drugs, and what they are doing, Demetrius, is using the whole drug and cartel element in a way very similar how they use the jihadist threat to justify their physical presence in various parts of West Asia and North Africa, and to disrupt and destabilize. And they're doing the same thing now with this excuse of the drug cartels. Not only in Ecuador, Colombia, but also in Mexico, which is also in the crosshairs of this Trump administration.
I'd like to switch now and talk to you about the momentous developments in West Asia, Ajamu, and focus on particularly the developments within the last 2 to 3 days. So I'm going to go back actually to the attack on Beirut by Israel. I guess it was 2 Sundays ago, about 8 days ago, which crossed an explicit red line that the Iranian government had imposed. When that attack happened on Sunday, I was actually in Beirut at that time, and we reported on it on this program. The Iranian government immediately declared that it was going to retaliate and strike Israel directly, but the strike never materialized. And the reason we were told is that at the last minute, the 11th hour, the Trump regime made serious concessions to Iran. One of those concessions, reportedly, was that the Trump regime would force Israel to stop bombing Lebanon and withdraw its troops. So here we are 8 days later. Israel has not withdrawn its troops. There are some unconfirmed reports that a few troops are being withdrawn, but certainly there's not been a wholesale withdrawal. And Netanyahu and other Israeli political leaders have ruled out categorically an Israeli withdrawal. And the strikes over the last week, but up until I believe it was Saturday, were quite severe, killing dozens of civilians and wreaking havoc across the south. And Iran, even though the Trump regime did not keep its commitment to stop the carnage and to force Israel's troops to withdraw, did not attack Israel. It did, however, reportedly close the Strait of Hormuz 2 days ago, I believe it was. So then this takes us to Sunday, yesterday. And it was planned in advance that there would be a meeting of the delegations of the United States and Iran in Switzerland. And they did indeed show up. And Trump, I think either hours before the Iranian delegation arrived or shortly after they arrived, went on this unhinged rant with a Fox News reporter in which he said that if the Iranians didn't behave, this was apparently in reaction to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, he was going to blow up the country, and the negotiating delegation of Iran would be lucky to get home alive from Switzerland, threatening to effectively murder them. And so the Iranian delegation decided, again, this has been widely reported, there's been a lot of, I would say, triumphalism in the alternative media about this. It refused to take part in a photo op with J.D. Vance in protest against the Trump threats, but they did apparently engage in some negotiation. And they established some kind of a framework for the next 60 days of negotiations, and also we are being told that the Trump regime has lifted some sanctions on Iranian oil to facilitate sales of the oil during the next 60 days. So I'm sorry for the long-winded precursor to my question, but I have to tell you that I personally, although I have the utmost admiration for what the Iranian people have done and how the state and the military of Iran have delivered grievous blows to Israel and the United States, and at least brought the United States government to the point of having to sit at the table with an MOU that on its face looks very favorable to Iran. Lifting of sanctions, unfreezing of assets, a $300 billion reconstruction fund. On the other hand, I personally am troubled that the willingness of Iran to negotiate under these circumstances might be signaling weakness to the United States and Israel. I'd like your views on all of this. And please don't feel confined to answering my particular question. I'm interested in your views on the whole MOU and the negotiations and where you think this is all heading.
Well, as you know, it's a very difficult situation that Iran finds itself in. And you know better than most some of the internal contradictions. You know that the Iranian state is not a monolithic state, that there are these nodules of competing power. And you have seen firsthand the consequences of this war and its impact not only on the Iranian people, but also on the economy. So they have enormous pressures internally. On the other hand, we know that there are many voices inside the country that are quite clear that they understand what the ultimate objective of the US and Israel is, and that is basically to destroy the Iranian state. And they are not in agreement that there should be an agreement with the US to release the pressure on the US by opening up the straits. They believe that and I think I've heard you say this too, that they have not evoked enough punishment for the US state to really feel the effects of its ill-advised attack on the country. And so they are opposed to this negotiation, and they are really offended by the continuation of this rhetoric from Donald Trump and his administration that clearly reveals that this 60-day whatever they're going to do is no more than just basically a pause, that it relieves the U.S. and the internal political pressure coming from both inside the U.S. but also from its allies that have felt the consequences of the closure of the straits, and that all they're going to do now is to prepare themselves over the next 60 days for the next phase of this conflict. I agree with many, not many, but a few of us that who believe that this notion of a $300 billion redevelopment fund for Iran is pie in the sky. It's not going to happen, and that recognizing that, again, some of these more insightful elements inside the Iranian state. That's why they are, I think, as fast as they can with this temporary space they have to get rid of some of the oil and to accumulate some resources. They are doing that as quick as they can, understanding the volatility of this situation they find themselves in. So I don't believe for a moment that the U.S. and Israel, that they are finished with Iran because of two elements. One, of course, is the desire to continue to control the energy flow in West Asia, to be able to assert some degree of pressure on the Chinese, at least in the short term, understanding that the Chinese is rapidly trying to diversify to the point where they won't need the oil from Iran. They already been cut off from Venezuela. So that's one point. The second, and I think the most important point, is that the U.S. does not want to see itself ejected from West Asia. which is the likelihood of what may in fact occur as a consequence of this debacle with the attack on Iran. And connected to that, of course, is their concerns about the petrodollar. And so their desire to control energy flows, to keep their vassal states in check, I think is going to outweigh uh, any other consideration. There will be no return to something called normal. And that's when the U.S. has basically decided that it's going to wage global war in order to try to maintain its standing, its global standing. And this connects up, I think, very clearly with the plan we just been discussing as it relates to the Americas. That they are quite clear, and they say it even in their documents, that they are committed to full spectrum dominance in every region of this planet. That's why they have 700 to 800 bases, and they have no intention to close those bases unless there is significant opposition from the global public. Okay, so no, this war is not finished. Is a pause, and until there is sufficient pressure coming from the public in the U.S. and maybe even in Western Europe, um, we're going to see a continuation of the reliance on the part of the U.S. and Israel on militarism to advance their interests and to consolidate what I refer to as global fascism. That's what we see with Honduras Gate and the activity of the U.S. in the Americas, and that's what we are seeing globally. That basically, as a consequence of globalization, the U.S. has the material means now, and the political reality to deal with in terms of consolidating a fascist uh, orientation, a fascist set of policies in order to advance its interests. So,
Mhm.
no, I don't see this ending anytime soon,
Mhm.
comrade.
So you and I were together in Tehran in May of last year, a few weeks before the 12-day war, the first criminal war of aggression on Iran. And that was my first time, but I understood what I recall, comrade, is that you had been there. You mentioned to me you had been there before on several occasions, I believe. And I don't know whether you've had the opportunity to go back since May of last year, but I'm curious to know whether or not you've had that opportunity. Do you have the sense that Iranian society has changed from what it was when you were there last and on your prior visits? And if so, how do you think it's changed?
Well, I haven't had a chance. Well, I had a chance to go back since the war started, but we couldn't make that trip. Um, but we have friends, and we're watching the situation very, very closely. And I will say, from my vantage point, which of course is outside, like most people, I think there has been a change in Iranian society. I think that with the discrediting of what we might refer to as the moderates, that there's been a shift to a more you referred to them as realists, and I think that your characterization is absolutely correct. People understand the real terms of the relationship between Iran and the U.S. And so there's a hardening of opposition, and whenever a society also is subjected to the horrors of war, there is also that hardening effect, if you will, to the point that you see these reflections coming from ordinary Iranians who have said things like how they were so fearful in the beginning and how they had wished that this had never unfolded, but that now they are demanding that the government does not compromise, and they are prepared to experience the ultimate sacrifice to maintain the dignity and the integrity of their state and their process. So there's been a hardening. Now, this is what is also though part of sort of the contradictory element of this. Why we see that there is this commitment on significant portions of the Iranian society to sacrifice in order to create the conditions where there will be a permanent cessation of hostilities. You still have some elements, and only way you understand this is by using class analysis, they still have this desire or this belief that they can have a equal and normal relationship between Iran and the United States of America and the collective West. And so they are desperate to try to create the conditions for that, even to the extent that they are being wooed around the possibility of being reintegrated into the global economic processes. And that I think is reflected in some of the hesitations, contradictions of Iranian policymaking as it relates to the so-called negotiations with the U.S. So changes, yes. Are they really being reflected in a consistent stance vis-a-vis the U.S.? Not yet.
Mhm, mhm. Uh, this next question is a little bit delicate for those of us who want to, express and maintain our solidarity with the Iranian government and the people of Iran above all. But it must be asked. There's a lot of the debates within Iran are being reflected also in the anti-imperialist communities around the world. All of whom are, I think, pretty much all of whom are expressing admiration for the resistance of the Iranian people and their military and officials. But when you get into questions about how to approach the United States and are you being co-opted, is this a trap, and so forth, sometimes the language can get quite, both inside and outside Iran, can become quite ad hominem around the people who are conducting these negotiations. So my question to you is, and this is my sensitive question, do you believe that ultimately people like the President Masoud Pezeshkian and Abbas Araghchi, Mr. Ghalibaf, the Speaker of Parliament, fundamentally they are acting in good faith, they're exercising their best judgment? This is not to say necessarily that they've made the right decision, but that they believe themselves to be acting in the best interests of the Iranian people.
Yeah, I don't see that being that sensitive at all. I don't believe that they are necessarily traitors or whatever. In particular, the head of parliament, um, they have a class perspective, and they believe that the policies that they want to pursue, attempting to normalize relations between Iran and the U.S. and the collective West, makes sense and is a possibility. Those of us who understand the white supremacist colonial mentality don't see that as a real possibility. That the Persians, as great as their civilization is, have been racialized as non-European and a threat to the objective interests of the two most powerful settler states on the planet. And in the case of the US, the most powerful imperialist state on the planet. And they have been targeted for destruction. And they need to understand, as more and more people within Iran are beginning to understand, that the only way you're going to be able to protect yourself is to be able to, in fact, protect yourself. That's one of the fears I think that the U.S. has. I predicted that if they went through with that attack on Iran when they were first, discussing the possibility of it, if they weren't successful in destroying the Iranian government and process, that it was going to result in two things: one, them being expelled from the region, and secondly, that Iran was going to, in fact, acquire the deterrent weapons that it needs in order to live in relative peace in ways similar to North Korea. And we know what that means. So basically, I think they're very much concerned about that. And I suspect that there are forces inside Iran that have come to the same conclusion. And so the U.S. has a dilemma because they recognize that it would be that there are forces that will believe that it's national suicide if they're not able to create the conditions where they have a real deterrent against continued U.S. and Israeli aggression.
And lastly, I can't help but ask you this because I know it was my strong sense. I have no doubt that, because of your solidarity and your excellent insights into the situation in Iran, and the obstacles and the challenges it confronts in dealing with these genocidal monsters in the West, that you command a good deal of respect. I have no doubt about that. I saw it with my own eyes amongst people within Iran, knowledgeable people, and people within the government. And so let's imagine that you had been assigned the task of being an advisor to the negotiating team in Switzerland. Okay, just work with me here, comrade. So, what would be your fundamental advice to them?
Remember now, far is real. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe you've actually been advising them and you just haven't revealed that. But on the assumption that's not the case, what would your advice be to the negotiating team at this point, and how to deal with, not just broadly speaking, these I don't know what to call them, these lunatics in the White House, but the specific issues that are the most contentious issues that have been deferred for further negotiation under the MOU?
First thing I would have said was that when they walked out, because they didn't want to take a picture, I thought at first they're walking out and they're going to demand a clarification of the commentary that came from the President of the United States, and that they were going to suspend participation in the so-called negotiations until those comments were retracted or clarified. That to me would have been the kind of power move that needed to take place. One. Secondly, and again, we discussed this briefly. If there's a lack of naivety on their part in terms of what are the real objectives of U.S. policy vis-a-vis Iran, then negotiating a situation where they can get some immediate relief in terms of their assets being relieved or turned over to them, then they should have driven a harder line on that. But absent that, opening up the straits again to allow for them to offload or to transship their oil and free up their oil storage capacities, to acquire resources, to then prepare themselves for the next round of hostilities, is probably all that they can achieve at this point. They're not going to get $300 billion. They're not going to get the U.S. vassals to commit to significant investment, even though those kinds of negotiations or conversations are taking place. What they're going to get, unfortunately, is more war. And so in the meantime, in order to avoid the complete collapse of the economy, having this infusion of resources from having a chance to sell their oil, and hopefully there'll be, in the meantime, in the 60 days, more international support for attempting to normalize the situation, that perhaps they might be in a better place to avoid the war. But right now, I think all planning should be for preparing for the next round of hostilities, unfortunately.
Sounds like damn good advice to me. But, hey, I'm not the decision maker in this context. So, comrade, always a great pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I look forward to our next conversation.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.